call to order the MPOJC Urbanized Area Policy Board meeting for Wednesday, January 31st, 2018. We're in North Liberty today. Welcome to everybody. Number 1A, recognize alternates and welcome new board members. Kent has the list, so Iowa City's missing. I know John Thomas was not going to be here. He was ill and couldn't get a substitute in time, but we're still missing a couple people, so I don't know if they're going to show up late or not.
Yeah, we'll see if they're trickling. I don't think there's any alternates that I'm aware of, any alternates tonight, but I did want to welcome, we have quite a few new members of the board. Mazahir Salih, who's not here yet, but we hope to see her tonight with Iowa City. Lisa Green Douglas from the county, welcome. Lori Rotlin is our new Iowa City Community School District representative. Welcome, Lori. Jim Sayer has taken Dave Ricketts' position at the University of Iowa, so welcome, Jim. Chris Hoffman, who I don't see Chris is here yet, but Chris Hoffman will be the new representative from North Liberty, and Megan Foster from Coralville, also absent tonight, and I know won't be able to make it from Coralville. So welcome all board members. We appreciate your time and your assistance.
Okay, thank you. 1B, consider approval of the meeting minutes.
So moved.
Second. Moved by Donahue, seconded by, was it Gill? Oh, Taylor. Okay, moved by Gill, seconded by Taylor. Sorry, two sitting over there, I didn't catch the difference. Any discussion of the minutes? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Approval, thank you. Set the next board meeting date, time, and location. Tentatively, we have March 28th, hosted by Coralville. Does that tend to work for people? Do we have some deadlines associated with that as well, Kent?
Yeah, we've got our transportation planning work program, which is an annual document due at the end of the month, so we usually try and push it back as far as we can. Okay. If that doesn't work for folks, we can change it up, but if it works for the majority, we'll contact Coralville and make sure that location works.
Okay.
What date is it again?
The 28th of March. It's a Wednesday. We'll plan on that then.
Thank you.
If people find that they can't make it, if you'd let Kent know, so if it looks like we're not going to be able to get a quorum, we can make some adjustments if we need to. Item number 2, public discussion of any item that is not on the agenda. Is there anybody who would like to address the board on any item that is not on tonight's agenda? It looks like the usual culprits in the audience.
Sure.
Staff and...
Yeah, I did have one, if there's no public comment, I did have one quick announcement. For those of you that have been working with the MPO for some time, Darian Nagelgam, who is our senior transportation planner, has taken a job with Iowa City. This would have been her last board meeting, but she had a family emergency and wasn't able to make it. Darian has been with the MPO for about 10 years. So it's a big loss to us. We're sad to see her go, but happy for the city of Iowa City. She'll be the new director of transportation services. So all parking, transit, and the downtown infrastructure.
Yeah, we are very excited to have her move into that position. She will be great.
Yeah.
So, okay. All right, moving on to number 3 then. A, report from the nominating committee for the 2018 MPOJC board officers.
Yeah, real quick, at your November meeting, you appointed a 3-person nominating committee, as you do every year, to nominate the chair and vice chair for this calendar year. The committee was comprised of Louise Fromm from University Heights, Mike Carberry with Johnson County, and Terry Donahue with North Liberty. As I have always done as director, it's been my practice to meet with the chair, or at least have a discussion about the agenda, make sure we're on the same page prior to all the meetings, and then the vice chair, of course, takes over when the chair is not present. Currently, as we all know, Susan Mims with the City of Iowa City has the chair and has been for 2 consecutive years. Steve Berner, Mayor of Tiffin, has been the vice chair for 2 consecutive years, and there's a 2-year limit per our bylaws for both of those positions. I wanted to quickly thank the nominating committee for their work on this matter, and also thank Susan and Steve for their work these last several years, chairing meetings in 2017. And with that, I would like to turn it over to someone from the nominating committee to make their nomination.
Okay, we met, I believe, in December, and there was a few hiccups on how many different coffee houses are named Java House in the area. So when we finally got that figured out, the meeting went very quickly. I had reached out to Mayor of Tiffin, Steve Berner, and asked him if he would be willing to serve as the chair. He had agreed to do that. And it's really nice because I believe that Mayor of Tiffin has never served in that capacity, so
That's correct.
We're very happy that he's agreed to do that. And then we asked the mayor, this was an inside job, Terry Donahue, Mayor of North Liberty, has agreed to be the vice chair. So, and he also agreed to that. So that was the report of the nominating committee.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. I mean, for this, we really just need a head nod. As long as folks are okay with that, that's the way and the direction we'll move forward.
Everybody good with that?
It's 2 years, right?
1 year.
1 year.
1 year.
One
Can
year.
go for maximum of
2 year
2
maximum, but
if they're
just 1 year.
reappointed. Yep.
Correct.
All right, well, that means I'm done.
Thank you, Susan.
Well, no, thanks. Sorry. Thank you. No, thank you, everybody. It's been my pleasure. This is a good group. I think we look at a lot of really important things in terms of the monies that come through here and how they get allocated across the region. So, been my pleasure, and happy to turn it over to Steve. It's all yours.
All right, thanks, Susan. Going to be big shoes to fill. So.
No, not really. This is a pretty easy one, actually.
This is a good time to remind Susan that there have been folks, it's 2 consecutive terms, so you may be back at a later date. That's happened in the past.
Yeah.
Is there a cooling off period?
Yeah, not per the bylaws.
Okay, we'll keep moving then. We're on to 3B, consider approval of the fiscal year 19 MPOJC budget and financial forecast.
Yeah, thanks. The proposed FY19 budget and financial forecast was included in your packet for review. The primary focus of the MPO remains to be fulfilling federal and state requirements to receive our discretionary and allocated funds from the state, and to produce locally generated traffic studies, grant applications, and so forth for all MPO communities. The overall budget reflects an approximate 12% increase over the last budget, primarily due to increases in benefits and wages, and also primarily due to the 0.5 or halftime equivalent that was approved at your last meeting. At least the head nod was given at the last meeting. After accounting for staff time devoted solely to City of Iowa City functions, MPO assessments are population-based, and those are reflected, of course, in the attached budget. The budget also reflects a reduction in the use of internal carryover funds, but an increase in DOT planning funds that we use, and both those are just to really align those balances and make sure they're healthy and where they need to be as we go into the future. I was not planning on going through the budget in any great detail, but I'm of course happy to answer any questions that you might have. The big change then, of course, being that halftime position that we talked about at your November meeting. This essentially ratifies that with approval of the budget. Any questions? It's really pretty status quo. As I mentioned at your November meeting, with that halftime equivalent hire, that will of course happen in July, because this is what for the FY19 budget. That puts us about where we were in terms of our budget for FY19 as to where we were in FY14. So we're really just sort of getting back to where we were about 5 years ago with the budget.
Do you need any action on that?
Yeah, we'll need a vote if there's no questions.
Any other discussion? Somebody want to make a motion on that?
So moved.
Second.
All right. Motion Donahue, second Mims. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. All right, it's approved. Next item will be 3C, consider approval of the fiscal year 19 Johnson County assessments to the Eastern Central Iowa Council of Governments.
Yeah, as you may know, the MPO collects each East Central Iowa Council of Governments, or ECOG dues for Johnson County entities, and forwards those on to ECOG. We're essentially a pass-through. The ECOG assessments are calculated on a per capita basis for the counties they serve, and then we in turn assess a per capita basis for all Johnson County governments. For FY19, ECOG proposed a 2% increase, which I think has been the case as long as I can remember, and that's reflected in the attached budget. ECOG is the designated regional planning affiliation for East Central Iowa, including Benton, Cedar, Iowa, Johnson, Jones, Lynn, Tama, and Washington counties. They provide planning and grant administration services in the areas of community and economic development, housing, solid waste, and transportation. Jennifer Fensel's here tonight with ECOG if there's any questions regarding the budget. Otherwise, as I mentioned, it's a 2% increase this year. That's been the case for some time. And what we'd like from the board tonight is that you consider this action if there are no further questions or no questions.
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion Donahue again? Or, okay, Gil.
You want me to move?
There was a second from over here somewhere. Carberry. All right, any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Okay, 3C is approved. Moving on to 3D, consider appointments to the ECI COG Board Directors.
Yeah, at your November meeting, we discussed the entities responsible for appointments to the ECI Board of Directors per the JCCOG bylaws. The entities to appoint elected officials for 2018 were Iowa City, North Liberty, and Shoeyville, and that works on a rotation that is somewhat complicated, but detailed in our bylaws. There's also one citizen appointment for which we advertised for potential candidates. The board had asked Aaron Maniza, who's the current citizen representative from Johnson County, to serve for one more year. I contacted Aaron, and he was interested, but wanted to give that opportunity to someone else. So we went ahead and advertised, and those applications are attached for your review. The appointees identified from each of the communities were Pauline Taylor from the Iowa City Council, the mayor for North Liberty, Terry Donahue. For Shoeyville, it's Mickey Kuhnfair, who's the mayor, and they also identified an alternate, which was Brent Foss of the City Council. And then the citizen applicants were Scott Kokatan, Jacob Hayden, Alan Weiskamp, Kurt Leifert, Randy Lobsher, and Derek Parker. And I believe that's a record for number of applications we got for citizen applications. So that's nice to see. And then what we're asking tonight is that the board consider the one Johnson County citizen representative, and then essentially just ratify the other appointees from the communities. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Any personal recommendations from folks?
Has there been any interviews done with the individuals, or does anybody know somebody personally?
Yeah, no, typically we don't do a lot on our end. The only true requirement is that you're a citizen of Johnson County, which all 6 are, as far as their applications are concerned. I don't personally know any of the 6, but I did review all their applications, of course, and it seems like most of them actually have quite a bit of good background that would be useful to ECCOG, so I don't have a recommendation. It's just a matter of what the board would like to do. All 6, I think, can do the job and do it well.
I killed a couple trees pretty.
Well, I recommend Randy Lobsher. I'm guessing at the pronunciation of the last name.
Any particular
Yeah.
reason?
Is there a reason? Yeah,
I just think some of the background in terms of some of the stuff that goes with environmental things. He's been around the area for a bit, experience at that DNA technologies and stuff, some of the watershed management stuff, data analysis. They all have some very good points and characteristics. So I mean, I could live with any one of them, but.
Are there any candidates here at the meeting? No?
I
Okay.
don't believe so.
Just thought I'd check.
Does anybody have any strong feelings on anybody else, or somebody want to second the nomination? Unless somebody wants to name somebody
I'll
else.
second the nomination.
Okay, motion Mims and second from. And that goes along with the motion that Kent said with ratifying the other positions. Any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no? Okay, it's approved.
Thank you. I'll contact Randy Lobsher, and we'll make sure he's interested, and we'll make sure to forward that on to ECCOG.
Moving on to 3E, we've got to consider appointing an MPOJC representative to the statewide urban design and specifications, or Suitus Board of Directors.
Yeah, thanks. Every other year, we are asked to appoint a representative to the statewide Urban Design and Specifications Board of Directors, or Suitus, as it's more commonly known. Suitus is a nonprofit organization which maintains Iowa manuals for specifications on public improvements, including everything from sewer and water to streets to public right-of-ways, so on and so forth. Scott Larson is the Assistant City Engineer for the City of Coralville. Scott has served in that position, I think, since 2005. And Scott has indicated that he's willing to serve for another 2-year term, if that's the desire of the board. We discussed this with the Technical Advisory Committee at their meeting on the 23rd of this month, and they unanimously recommended that Scott serve for another 2-year term. We also have Ron Kanucky, the Public Works Director from the City of Iowa City, is the District 6 representative on that group. So we have 2 local engineers that serve in that capacity, Ron Kanucky and then Scott Larson. The only requirement for this position is that they are a licensed engineer in the state of Iowa and they're working for one of the MPO entities, which Scott is and does.
I'd move that we appoint Scott Larson.
I second.
Motion, ma'am, second from.
Oh, no, it can't be twice.
Any other discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Okay, it's approved.
Thank you.
3F, discussion of the MPOJC orientation opportunity for board members.
Yeah, real quickly, I just wanted to offer a orientation for any new members or any current members that want a refresher on who the MPO is and what we do. We've got a number of new board members this year, more than in some years past. And simply by a show of hands of anyone that's interested, I typically set up about an hour orientation on a weeknight and try to find something that works for folks. So if there's anyone interested, either let us know now by show of hands or contact me at a later date and I'll try to set something up. Okay. Let me get these names real quick. So Kingsley, Mazahir, Lori, Jim, Lisa?
Yes.
Okay, and I'll make sure to reach out to those folks that couldn't be here tonight, and I'll set something up maybe in the next 2 or 3 weeks, month for sure. Thank you.
Okay, moving on, number 4, 4A, consider approval of the Federal Transit Administration, Section 5307, Transit Operating Formula Funding, apportionment for the fiscal year 2018, and transit statistics for fiscal year 2017.
Yeah, Brad Newman, Assistant Transportation Planner. You can see here we the MPO gets this year about $2.5 million is available in Section 5307 operating assistance through the FTA. You can see in the memo it's down a little bit from FY17, just a little bit. Just the federal funding is has gone down a little bit. These funds are apportioned by the board between Iowa City Transit, Coralville Transit, and CAM Bus, University of Iowa. The formula we use is based on 4 factors. It includes operating costs, locally determined income, revenue, miles, and fare revenue. There's something a little different this year. We had a little twist. After talking to the transit managers and the administration regarding the locally determined income definition, we would like to have the board consider changing that definition when we approve the formula. The formula, I should say, it does include the new definition, and I'll try and explain the difference here. What we had been using, there's 6 different categories for revenue. We've been using 4 of those categories, all but federal and state money. The new way to do it would be to take the operating funding minus the state and federal funding. It basically allows, there's some accounting discrepancies. There's 3 different systems, 3 different ways to do it. This way would remove any inconsistencies. It would kind of level the playing field. All 3 managers are in support of that, as well as administration. So that we will ask you to do at the same time we approve the formula tonight. You'll see attached to the memo is the proposed 2018 apportionment, which I said includes the new LDI definition, as well as 2017 for comparison. We also have performance statistics because all the numbers are based on DOT-approved statistics that we use in our formula. The statistics that are attached, it's interesting because it does provide the ridership, cost per hour, cost per mile breakdown on all three systems. So, and it includes the paratransit system as well. So TAC unanimously recommended approval of the apportionment and the change to the LDI definition. Any questions on the definition? I know it gets a little murky, but it's just a different way to do it, and I think it'll work well. It just takes a lot of the guessing out of it, I guess. So, and it is consistent then with other reports that we do to National Transit Database, and to the state uses the same kind of formula, so to distribute their money. So it is more consistent, and that would start here in FY18. Any questions?
Hearing nothing, you want action on this?
We just
So we
need
will-
one vote
Yeah, so we'll need
to
a
approve
motion.
both.
If there's no discussion.
So moved.
So moved by Mims,
Second.
second from over here somewhere. Green Douglas?
Yeah.
All right, any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. All right, motion carries. Thanks, Brad. Moving on, 4B, consider an amendment to the adopted fiscal year 18 to 21 MPOJC Transportation Improvement Program adopting state safety targets for the urbanized areas.
Yeah, thanks. Some of you will remember that at your November 15th meeting, the policy board unanimously recommended adopting the state's safety targets to meet new Federal Highway Administration requirements for the adoption of safety performance measures. I included in your packet the memo dated November 7th that was included in your November packet for your information. You'll remember that the new requirements are part of the Highway Safety Improvement Program and require the MPO to either support the state's safety targets or set our own for each of the 5 targets that are in the memo from November 7th. The memo that you received indicated staff support for adopting and supporting the state's targets rather than setting our own for 3 reasons. One is uncertainties in reporting requirements that are going to come up over the next year. The DOT wasn't even sure exactly what those were going to be at that time that we discussed that item. The potential for future penalties for not meeting targets. There are no penalties to date, but I think in the next, I anticipate in the next 5 to 10 years there will be. And when we start to set our own targets, there's some uncertainties there. And then also just the time constraint, because these were supposed to be adopted by February 27th. So the sheer time we had to come up with our own targets would have been difficult. Now, to fully comply with the new FHWA requirements, the DOT is requiring that the language that's provided in your memo be included in our TIP. So this is an amendment to the current TIP. And rather than going through all that long language, in a nutshell, it basically indicates that if there's a highway safety improvement program project in our area for which the DOT wants to move forward with, we'll at least review that project and then we would program that in our annual TIP, which is no different than any other project really that's in our area that the DOT has. We program their funds in our TIP currently. So no big change there, but we do need to amend our current TIP. At their January 23rd meeting, the Transportation Technical Advisory Committee did unanimously recommend adding this language to the current TIP. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. This is one of those requirements that as we move forward with the new transportation legislation, there's a lot more performance measures that seem to be coming down to the MPO level, and this is one of those. In the future, there'll be more of these coming, but right now they're just focused on these 5 safety targets. Arguably, we already program projects that try to achieve all those projects, so just kind of working towards the state targets seemed to make a lot of sense when we talked about this in November, and still do, given some of those uncertainties that I outlined earlier. Any questions?
If there's no questions, we're looking for action on this as well.
Yes, please.
So moved.
Okay, we got a motion from
Second.
second Mims. Any other discussion?
We have a quiet group tonight.
Yeah. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Okay, motion passes. We will move on to 4C, discussion of the potential for a federal aid swap in Iowa whereby state funding could replace federal funding for road and bridge projects.
Yeah, as we discussed at our September meeting, this will be new for some of you, House File 203 that was signed into law this past legislative session permits the Transportation Commission of the Iowa DOT to now allow what's commonly referred to as a federal aid swap. This is where road and bridge projects in the state of Iowa that would have formerly received federal funding would now be swapped with state funding, all done sort of behind the scenes at the state level. The idea behind the federal aid swap is to minimize federal requirements that often delay projects and then increase the cost. The Iowa DOT has now completed their stakeholder consultation process and has provided a draft policy for review, which I've attached in your packet as well. The DOT indicated that they will seek Iowa Transportation Commission approval of the draft policy as early as their February 13th meeting, with full implementation to occur federal fiscal 18, so in October of this year. Unless our MPO chooses to opt out of the swap program, it's assumed that we're opting in. And I did want to mention, just clarify that this only applies to our surface transportation block grant funds. So the federal funding that the MPO gets that we allocate every 2 years for roads primarily, this is that funding pool. The Transportation Alternative Program funds, which we allocate every other year as well, and we typically allocate for trails, is not eligible for the swap at this time. So right now we're talking about primarily road and bridge projects, not so much the trail projects. While there's no inherent harm in opting in or out of the swap, many questions of exactly how the swap will be implemented still remain, and really the information I have is the information I provided in that draft policy. There's a lot of sort of holes in the policy right now. However, we will have to opt in or out every year. So again, that's why I say there's really maybe no inherent harm, because even if we opt in this year, we can opt out next year, and so forth. At the Transportation Technical Advisory Committee meeting, they discussed this topic on the 23rd and unanimously recommended moving forward with the swap or opting into the swap. I asked Jason Havel, city engineer from Iowa City, to be here tonight to answer any questions you have about some of the efficiencies that might occur. And I did that because on the MPO level, there's really not a lot of change. The DOT decided that we would still have to have a competitive grant process, which is what we have had and will still do every 2 years. We still have to program projects in our TIP, so they're eligible for federal, or in this case, state funding, if we opt in. And those are really the big picture issues that the MPO works with. A lot of the efficiencies with respect to contracting and those sorts of things really aren't in my wheelhouse, because there's things that occur sort of behind the scenes once we've allocated those funds. So I asked, again, Jason Havel, city engineer, to be here just to kind of let you know how, at least from Iowa City's perspective, the engineers move forward. So any technical things about sort of the back end of what the swap might look like, Jason can help with, and any questions for the MPO, obviously, I can help with. Yeah, Mike.
Federal contracts normally require Davis-Bacon, prevailing wage, that sort of thing.
Right.
State contracts do not.
Right.
And so when you have a swap, you're basically, you're able to hire cheaper labor, at least the way I'm looking at it.
Right.
Can somebody address that?
Yeah, so I can address the part about the state contracts. You're correct that if this is state money, Davis-Bacon, Buy America, some of those other programs for which I don't know, there might be efficiencies. But Jason can kind of tell you how that looks, at least from Iowa City's end.
That's correct. So with the swap, you would be using state money instead of federal money. Davis-Bacon, Buy America, that stuff is currently a federal requirement, so there wouldn't be that same requirement on local projects. As far as, I know there's some municipalities that have looked at ways and consideration of doing that on their own, but on a whole, there wouldn't be that requirement on local projects with swap money.
So does that work that way for, like, ICAP is federal money, right? We've got some ICAP money that's coming on a roundabout, which is a DOT project. Has also has state money in it too. So is that going to affect the city of Tiffin on how federal rules apply to the ICAP?
Essentially, anything that is federal money would keep those requirements. So if you have some federal funding on a project and some state funding, the federal would trump the state. And so you would still have those federal requirements. Now, there are other programs beyond the STP that are eligible for swap, and I believe ICAP is one of those. And if that's the case, then you would have the potential to swap the ICAP money as well. So in that case, all of your federal money would become state money, and so those requirements would no longer be there because those are federal requirements.
Who makes that decision, the city, or since it's a DOT project, we'll work with the DOT on that? Or
When you
does
say
our
that
engineers-
decision, which decision are you referring
To decide the ICAP money, we have to follow federal rules or state rules if we swap.
So my understanding of what happens is it's the MPO's decision whether or not to swap funds. And my understanding is it's kind of all or nothing. So you would basically decide to be in the swap program or not. And so it would be any swap eligible programs, those funds would then be swapped if you, I guess, don't elect to opt out.
Right, and my understanding is the ICAP funding would be eligible for the swap, but keep in mind that if a project has been federalized, is the term that the DOT uses, so if there's been any activity on a project at all, if you started your environmental review, if you went out for a letting, for bids and that sort of thing, your project would not be eligible because you've already started down the road. This coming spring, the DOT is supposed to be looking at our Transportation Improvement Program, so that's the document where we program all the MPO funds annually. They are to be looking at that this spring, and they will let us know which projects are eligible and which projects are not. So around the time we're putting together our TIP for approval in May, we should have that information available at that time. But like I said, if your project has already made any movement at all with respect to contracts and environmental review, your project would already be automatically out of the swap. Any other project that's eligible, we're either all in or all out, like Jason had mentioned, but that any projects that already had that movement would not be eligible. So those would just continue down the path they've already started as federal projects.
So our engineers will need to know if we're following federal rules or state rules.
Correct.
Based on the timing.
Correct.
And which year?
Right, and so District 6, we're in Iowa DOT District 6. I know even for some of the Iowa City projects already, District 6 engineers that manage these projects on the DOT side have already identified some projects in Iowa City and had that question saying, you know, have you opted in or not, which we are discussing tonight, but already sort of thinking ahead that, you know, if you're thinking about letting a project in 6 months, you might want to wait 8 months until we've got all the information put together. So I know they're already thinking about that and they're already looking ahead to see how things will work. I had a discussion with one of Jason's engineers this morning about a project in Iowa City that's really not ready to let at this point in time for bids, but will be this fall. And I know that District 6 DOT engineer had already contacted them and said, you know, do you know if you're going to be eligible for the swap or not? And was asking about what we're discussing tonight. So they're aware of it, and it shouldn't be too hard to figure out when that time comes.
One other thing to note is these projects, the swap projects will still have to go through the DOT as well. And the DOT has different process points, I guess, in place. So with that, it's not something where you would get to the end of the project, be ready to bid it, and then find out that you've done it wrong. They would basically catch that early enough in the process that you would have to follow the correct process,
Right.
whether that's federal aid or not.
Yeah, it shouldn't slip through the cracks. There should be no way, because like we said, we're either all in or all out. They'll know that, because I'll inform the DOT of that decision after tonight or whenever we come to that determination. And we'll be in discussions with the DOT then, so they'll know and they'll be aware of it.
So is this a,
As a brand new member on this is all new to me, so I can certainly see, you know, one of the advantages you said is that it can speed up the process, which would ultimately make it cheaper, because the longer you wait on something, the more costs go up. But it also sounds like maybe there might be some, I'm just a little bit leery here. I kind of want to know more, because I want to know why, like, what's in it for them?
Right.
Why do they want this to be done? I mean,
When you say
who
them, you mean
benefits?
the DOT?
Who benefits? is what I
Certainly
wanna
the
know.
DOT benefits as well. There'll be some efficiencies and reduction oversight for the DOT. So there is certainly a benefit for the DOT, and they've been pretty upfront with that since the beginning, that it's intended to provide efficiency benefits for both the DOT and local agencies.
Wasn't part of it, Jason and Kent, the fact that you might have a lot of small projects that have federal money, and so they all have to have more oversight and detail, and you could take those different smaller pots of money and throw them onto a much bigger project, and so with those smaller projects, you don't have that same kind of points, that same oversight that you would have. So you get some efficiencies in putting bigger hunks of federal money on bigger projects instead of spreading it out over smaller projects.
Potentially, and that's one strategy that some local agencies have used.
And I agree, because I had a lot of the same questions and a lot of the same skepticism in what these efficiencies are. And like I mentioned, what's in your packet as far as the policy, that's really what MPOs have received. There's been stakeholder meetings. There were 3, I believe, of the 9 state MPOs represented on that stakeholder, or in the stakeholder process. Our MPO was not one of them. They couldn't take all 9 MPOs and all 18 RPAs. It just got to be too unwieldy. But we had our federal review for the MPO about 3 weeks ago, and I did mention at that review this came up and how we were moving forward, and I voiced my it's not skepticism for the swap, but I voiced my opinion on that. I didn't feel that our MPO really had been
given enough information.
Given enough information and given the time to make these decisions, to which the DOT said, well, we're doing as good as we can, and we've got to keep the process moving. But they also admitted that a lot of the details have not been hammered out. And to that end,
they want us to make a decision?
They do. There are certainly there are some benefits to the MPO as well, one of which, and if we opt in, we will need to have some further discussion. One of which is that because it's state funding, there's no 20% match required anymore. So right now for MPO funds, we can only fund up to 80% of the project that you might be applying for with a 20% match. If the swap goes through, we can allow up to 100% funding. Now, typically, and the average, I think, typically we're at about a 60% funding for projects because we have too many good projects and not enough funding. So we're usually funding up to about 60% on average. If we wanted to, we could then fund up to 100%. That typically helps smaller communities more, our Tiffins and our University Heights, because they have a harder time coming up with that 20% match for a project. So that is one benefit. We can still then, if we opt in, create our own policies where we still require the 80-20 match. We can really do what we want at that point in time. The other thing, and this one I'm a little curious about as well, is that the way we currently program our TIP, we go through our Transportation Improvement Program every year, and when we go through our funding allocation process every other year, we're actually funding projects in year 4 and 5 of our TIP, because that's when the funding comes and that's when we end up getting those programmed. The way it would work under a swap is you can actually front load some of your Transportation Improvement Program, so you can actually take those projects, and if there's actual funding available at the DOT, you can shift some of those projects forward. So if we opt in, we will have to have that discussion about whether or not we want to start reprioritizing projects or just sort of leave those projects in the year that we originally allocated that funding. So if you have a project that was allocated funding in 21, for instance, there's a chance you can actually push that project forward, which of course then saves communities funding because you get the project done sooner, in theory. But that will only work if the DOT actually has the funding available. And they've been, and in that, in the information that was in your packet, I think it's the only bolded item is make sure if you're asking for that, you're going to actually go through with that project, because their fear is that every other MPO and RPA in the state is going to front load a project and they actually don't have the funding available at the time. So there are some efficiencies for us too in terms of we could then of course fund up to 100%. We can shift projects around if we need to. All to be discussed at a later date. But then, of course, there's some efficiencies, like Jason mentioned. In my discussions, I've talked to, I think, engineers from every one of our respective communities about this. And as Jason, or as I mentioned, I guess the Transportation Technical Advisor Committee was unanimously in favor. And I think part of that was, there's really no harm in this, except for maybe if you're interested in Davis-Bacon and Buy America and those things, for which we could still have our own policy.
That's still significant.
It is.
That's not a minor issue.
Right, and we could still have our own policy. We can still we can still require as a community or as individual communities that you require Davis-Bacon or Buy America and those sorts of things. So it just provides a little more flexibility, and I think where the Transportation Technical Advisory Committee was coming from is, let's give it a whirl, see how it works, and everybody else in the state's in the same boat.
Well, but the flip side
And then
of
we can
that
always
is,
opt back out
since
again.
you can, every year,
Right.
you have to do it, the flip side of what you just said is, well, there's no harm in
Sure.
in opting in. Well, there's no harm in waiting a year
Correct.
and getting more information, because if they're saying, well, this is the best we can provide you right now, but we want you to decide.
Right.
I really don't think they're,
So-
Yeah.
they're
So let's be
providing what
honest
we
here.
need to make a good decision.
Right.
And I heard two different things. I heard Susan saying that one of the advantages was that you could have all these different projects and it would be more oversight, but you were saying that there's a reduction of oversight.
I don't think the combining of
times you
projects would
said
be
it,
an
so.
increase in oversight. I agree. I mean, that's
Okay,
part
so
of
which is
the
it?
intent is that there would be a reduction in oversight. And that would be, so for example, on the environmental side, you know, I think one of the things that came out originally was there's going to be a savings on environmental reviews. There is, from the standpoint of it no longer has to work its way all the way up to the federal level, but there's still state laws in place. And so, I mean, a lot of the same work happens. You just don't have to wait that 6 months plus for a federal signature to continue with your project. I think overall, the impression that I've gotten from these meetings with the DOT and other entities is that there's not really here's a big item where we're going to save 50% on our construction costs. What it is it's kind of a lot of little things that maybe we don't have to have as much of an audit at the end, and so we save some hours and some time here and there. And so I think it's kind of that adding all those little things up, there's some benefit, but I don't think that you're going to see that giant reduction maybe that some people thought going into this. I think it's just been through those discussions and realizing that a lot of this stuff still has to happen to have a good project. I think you've seen that there's some savings there, but it's more little things than it is any great big things that save a huge percentage.
So I wanted to address the efficiencies. Obviously, some of them are because you don't have to go through federal environmental review, but when you're talking about Davis-Bacon and some of these Buy American, when it really not having to do that, what that does is that it means that you don't have to hire union labor. It means that you can take, I mean, I was there when they passed this law to do this swap. It was basically people that were anti-union were trying to carve the unions out of this and saying, well, we could take the cheapest non-union bid now. We don't, I mean, that's what this is. It's a union busting thing. And sure, we're gonna save some money, but are we gonna get the same quality of projects that we were? Because it's, you know, and who knows? I'm not saying that a non-union shop can't do as good a job as a union shop, but it's, a lot of times they're gonna undercut the union shop in price. So that's what this is.
Yeah.
And so.
And I believe Bill Gerhardt came and spoke at least at the city council meeting, I think, on this law. And they were adamantly opposed to it for that very reason, I think, that Mike had identified. They had real concerns about lowering the wage rates for a lot of the workers on these projects.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we'll have an opportunity for discussion, but I'm adamantly opposed to this.
Yeah, no, those are obviously all valid points. I had a same concern, although I'll be honest, I did not totally understand the Buy America Act and Davis-Bacon. I know what they are, but I've never dealt with them like engineers would. I know I did bring that up to one of the engineers in one of my many discussions I had, and that particular engineer said, well, you know, because I said, well, how's this going to work with Davis-Bacon? And they said, the thing is about Davis-Bacon locally, and I'm taking this engineer's word for this, but they said our wages are high enough that Davis-Bacon would not have paid more anyway, typically,
Some of our
which may be
wages are
true.
high enough, but some
right.
of our wages are not.
Right.
To that so the question is to that extent, because I would agree with some of the sentiment already about my concern about kind of usurping the Davis-Bacon piece, but do we have to make a decision tonight on the policy implications that we as a collective body can essentially put in place to ensure that we could possibly move forward on it? Because, I mean, if we can create a win-win situation here, I'm more interested in that, but if we can't, then I'm not interested at all.
Right. No, that's a good question. And in your memo, I mentioned, I didn't verbalize it tonight, we really don't have to make this decision until our May meeting. So we've got about 2 more meetings to make this decision. And that's why as far as the agenda item, it was for a discussion. It wasn't necessarily for consideration. With head nods and with the unanimous vote, so to speak, we would have moved forward in that way. But really, it was meant to be a discussion. The same was true at the Technical Advisory Committee meeting, and I was a little bit surprised that they voted unanimously that there just wasn't the same, there weren't the same level of concern, I guess, is fair to say. But no, we have plenty of time to discuss this. We really don't have to discuss it. We should have a healthy discussion probably at our March meeting, and then our next meeting following that will be May. By the May meeting, it would be very good if we had the answer to this question, because that's the same meeting where we will be approving the draft TIP, and there's going to be some language and things we need to input into that TIP before it's finally approved. So we easily have one more meeting, if not two, where we can have this discussion.
Because it would be a little bit backwards almost. If we approve it without having in place those things that Kingsley is talking
Right.
about, and then we don't agree, then those of us who are kind of reluctant about this are going to be agreeing to something that
Yeah.
ultimately we don't like the little
Right.
pieces, the provisions. So we need to have those hammered out, I think, before we make a decision.
Yeah, no,
rather
and
than after.
that's perfectly fine. What I would say is that my thoughts on how to move forward would be, of course, that everyone needs to go back and really speak to their engineers, because that's really where, well, engineers and policymakers, of course, but I think having a good, healthy discussion with your individual engineers about what it means for them would be a really good idea, and they can then, of course, tell you what some of their efficiencies might be, the way they see it. And of course, then we've got the policy decisions about Davis-Bacon, Buy America, and those sorts of things. If we move forward, and to Kingsley's statement, my thought is that we would still probably require a 20% match, and again, that's up for debate if we opt in, because we can go up to 100. But the 20% match has always been the board's desire, and it was a requirement, but it's always been the board's desire to at least have a 20% match, and I think that's where we come up with that about 60% average funded project, because buy-in from the community is important. That shows you really want a project, that shows you've been planning for that project, most of your policymakers in this room, and that shows that you've really sort of put your money where your mouth is, so to speak. So I think my recommendation, and again, we can discuss this in future meetings, would be to continue on with some form of match, because I think it's important. But again, some of the smaller communities may have a differing opinion on that. The other thing is with this prioritization piece, where you can actually take some of those projects you've had and start trying to program them earlier. If and when we get to that conversation, I would recommend we do not do that for a few reasons. One is that there's a reason why that all our communities have applied for these projects in a certain year. You know, that it takes a certain amount of project planning then on engineers' ends, in policymakers, CIP discussions and budget discussions to have that foresight. And then we program funding accordingly. Now, there are certainly issues that pop up. American Legion Road for Iowa City is one that comes to my mind, because I worked on that project to some degree, is that for American Legion Road, by the time the city knew that the school district was going to place that building where they did on American Legion Road, Iowa City sort of played catch up and said, well, we need to reconstruct American Legion Road, and the funding actually came obviously after the school opened. So that's one of those things where it may have made sense to go ahead and allocate that funding earlier. However, there is a way we can do that now called advanced construction through the DOT. Now, it's a little bit harder to achieve, but on occasion, they will let us advance projects. Typically, it's only when you have a project that has funding back to back. So for American Legion Road, they actually received funding in 2 allocation periods, and they had funding in 2 back-to-back years. The only other time that's occurred was for the city of Coralville on their First Avenue project. They also received funding in 2 allocation periods, so they had funding back-to-back in our TIP, and they actually were allocated advanced construction because for the DOT, they said, well, you're getting funding in 2 years anyway, why don't we go ahead and advance that 1 year? In this case, I mean, we're sort of talking about something completely different where it's kind of free game to advance projects when and where you can, so long as the funding's available. But it seems that sort of takes out some of all the good planning and the good budgeting that communities do. So those are 2 things I think we would have a healthy debate about if we opt in. If we opt out, then we would still be held to what we do now.
So I'm a little confused. So you said we have at least 2 meetings to come
Right.
up with that action, but, and I may be reading this wrong, but from this, in the schedule that you showed here, it says February 13th.
That was for the previous, that was for the safety, that was for the that was the previous agenda item. The February 27th, is that what you're looking at, Kingsley, that date?
No, I thought I was looking at the federal aid swap policy.
Is it in there? As
At the DOT's meeting.
Oh, sorry, yeah, sorry, Kingsley. The February 13th is for the DOT commission to actually approve the swap.
Oh, okay.
So, sorry, I was confused. So right now, the DOT commission has not approved the swap, but my understanding is that it'll likely be rubber stamped at that February 13th meeting. Sorry.
So if we haven't decided by February 13th, then that's an automatic no.
No.
No, we will be able to opt in and out, Lisa, regardless of that February 13th date. That's just the date where the DOT commission will actually allow this to occur, but it's going, I mean, it's going to occur. You know, it was passed, yeah, it was passed, the legislation already passed it, so really the commission is just, they had their stakeholder process meeting where they were, you know, hearing everyone out, and like I said, certain MPOs were on that panel. But really, the February 13th date is if we or any of your respective communities want to actually give guidance or provide input to the DOT, you would want to do it before that date.
The other question I had is, so from a process standpoint, you're saying we need to go back to our respective communities. Can you send like this information? I mean, obviously we have it ourselves, but can you send this information to our, I mean, I know from our council standpoint, if you sent it and put it into our packet, we could then make a discussion. I don't know how it works for everybody else's, but I think that would, you know, ensure that, I'm not saying anybody wouldn't have this discussion, but sure, ensure that it got to council and would be public information to people weighing in as well as we're having this conversation.
Yeah, so I think the best way for me to do that, I would probably just send this information to all the city administrators and the county chair.
Yeah.
Just so, and then they can, you know, input it however your respective communities handle it. But I think, and I feel that we might want to defer this to the next meeting, and that's fine. But I would have that healthy debate with your other counselors, your city administrators, and city engineers. Those would be the best resources to get a full understanding of this. I apologize to the technical advisory committee, and I'll do the same for you. It's never fun to bring things forward before you know all the answers. The issue being here is that we won't have any more answers before probably May. This is what, you know, there might be a few tweaks,
We
but.
shouldn't decide until May.
Right, there's a few tweaks, but likely the same information we have now will be the same information we have to make this decision at our March or May meeting.
Ken, how often can we opt, if we opt out, when can we decide?
Annually, so it'd be, that's a good question, it would be annually about the May timeframe, because that's when we approve the Transportation Improvement Program. And again, that's the document that actually allocates our funding and programs it into a year which it can be spent. If we opt in, then of course we have some leeway to rearrange that TIP and how those projects are funded and allocated.
So if we were uncomfortable, we could opt out and work on some local policies if we wanted to, and do that over that course of that year, and then
opt in.
continue to opt out or opt back.
Correct. Yep.
But the state folks, are they wanting input from us of what our concerns are? Or not?
Yeah, I think so. You know, I think likely your city administrators have all been receiving a lot of the same information I have about the swap. I know city engineers, public works directors have all been in the know. In fact, a lot of members from your communities probably were on some of these stakeholder meetings. I know Iowa City had a representative. I'm trying to think. I'm not sure if anyone else knows, but there were some representatives from local governments. But again, that's where I told the technical advisory committee the same thing. It's never fun to bring things forward without having all the details. And even the DOT admittedly has said, you know, there's a lot of kinks we won't understand until we actually go through the process. The issue is, I think most of the state, I would venture to guess that most communities in the state are very happy to opt in. But that doesn't mean we are, and that's probably why they're not too concerned about having some of those details.
And that's probably why we weren't invited to be at those meetings.
Yeah, you know, that I don't know. I will say this on the DOT's behalf.
They can't invite everybody.
Yeah, on the DOT's behalf, I will say this. It's much more complicated than it even sounds, because of all the nuances and how the state, of course, funds projects and how all this looks. So I think they are doing the best they can, but there's a lot of these things where it's sort of, you don't know what the answer are until you try it. And I think honestly, that's sort of where DOT's at, where some of these things just won't be fleshed out until their first go at it. But like I said, I think they'll have enough willing participants that they'll kind of flesh that out and flesh out the details when they go through it.
I'd like to make a motion to defer this discussion until the next meeting.
I would second that.
Got a motion, Carberry, second. Cole, to defer. Any other discussion?
Well, what more will we know then? than
I'd
what we
like to know
now?
what the thought process of the engineers was. You know, they readily approved it, so there was got to be a reason that they're not that concerned about it. You know, I'd like to know what their thinking is on that, because you know, is it really as big as people say it is?
Yeah.
And you may know more than I do, but is it when it really comes down to nuts and bolts, is it really that important?
Well, to me, I'm interested in looking at.
You know, well, what I'm saying is that we were going to get the same results anyway. You know, these other factions really, are they really viable?
Potentially, but I was interested also in looking at the policy implications side by side. So I know that you said this is all the information that we've been given, but I'd be interested in asking our own engineer, you know, what does this mean? You know, taking out, I mean, the wage piece is a huge piece, but taking out that and just looking at the environmental implications, I don't have the knowledge right now sitting in front of me that there would be substantial changes, but what if there are? And so what does that mean, and how does that play into what we would be adopting? So.
I'd like to hear from organized labor too. I know the construction trades, when they came to our council, were passionate. They brought in a lawyer from Des Moines, expressed a lot of concerns about the depressing quality on the wages. So I guess hopefully we can flag that for organized labor during the next meeting. And as well as the construction trade. I mean, if the construction industry wants to bring in their advocate, we could hear that too. But for now, I'd be opposed.
So it sounds like we'll bring this back at your March meeting. I think what I'll do is I'll
We didn't
put.
vote yet.
Well, we do
Haven't
have a
voted
motion
yet,
to defer, but there's no action required, so.
No action's required, you know, unless, and I mean, it looks like there's a lot of head nods to bring this back. And I think that's fair regardless, if there's no hurry to get this through. I anticipated a lot of good, healthy discussion, is why I put it on the agenda this early. I didn't want to bring it to you and say we have to decide tonight. So what I'll do is I will send as much information as I have to all city administration and to the county chair, school district as well, for information, and then I would, like I said, I would strongly suggest that you talk to your engineers, anyone else you feel necessary to make those decisions. I'll plan to put it on the March meeting, and we'll have another healthy discussion about it, and I will probably put it on in March for a vote. And of course, we don't have to vote on it, we can defer at that point in time, but hopefully we'll have enough information that we can get a vote at that time. That'll help us be prepared for the TIP a little bit sooner. If that sounds fair to everyone.
Yeah. Well, it's not a matter of fairness as much as if we're still, you know, if you bring it to a vote in March, we still won't have had anything hammered out in terms of what we want in there for our, you know, if we choose it, we get to make our own
Right, so
rules and stipulations and such, and we won't have that.
Yeah,
So
that's
it's still kind of a backwards process.
well, so that's a good question. So really what we would be doing is just, we're automatically opted in unless we opt out. That's the way the DOT sees it. So regardless of how you see it, we'll either opt in or we'll opt out. The discussions on what match will be required and whether we're going to prioritize projects really doesn't have to occur until next spring when we go through our funding allocation, or we do it about this time of year in preparation for next spring's funding allocation. So we can do that and we can have that discussion then. So we don't necessarily have to have that before May. But I will say, having those discussions and ironing that out may help you all make your decision. You know, you may, as far as your vote's concerned, you may want to know how those policies are going to look in advance. You know, I don't know how important that is to folks, but we can certainly have those discussions as well. So I'll bring that back up and I'll try and articulate it better in March. But those discussions, as far as the MPO, those are just MPO discussions, and those really don't have to be made until before our next funding allocation process. So those are our internal policies if we opt in. If we opt out, that's a moot point anyway, because we will still be using federal money and we'll still have the 80-20 match, and we'll still have to program projects the way they are currently. Clear enough? Yeah. It's a tough one. And, you know, I don't have, as far as the MPO is concerned, the MPO administration, I don't have a stance on this. To be honest, as I mentioned, we can come up with any policy we want in terms of moving forward. So if we move forward and we enter into the swap, we can still create our own policies. So that part, as far as the MPO is concerned, I don't really have a stance on, because we'll do whatever the wishes of the board is. But as far as the actual swap itself, as far as the MPO is concerned, we really don't have a stance on it. It's really more of a local issue, because once we allocate the funds, it becomes your local funding, and then it's your local issue in terms of how you want to move forward. The unfortunate part about this is we're all in or we're all out. We can't, it has to actually be decided at the MPO level. One community can't opt in and one community opts out. So that's a little bit of the unfortunate part about this. We all have to come to an agreement one way or another. So again, I'll make sure to follow up with all administration with as much information as I can. Happy to sit down with them and schedule meetings with any of you, actually, to try and get as much information as we can to you. But I'll go ahead and plan on putting a vote on in March. And if we have to defer then, we'll have a few more months before May before we really need to make that decision. Okay, thank you.
That makes sense to you, Mike, why we didn't act on your motion?
Sure.
It wasn't necessary.
It wasn't necessary.
All right, anything else? All right, moving on to 4D, an update with the MPOJC Fiscal 19 Transportation Planning Work Program and the Fiscal 19 through 22 Transportation Improvement Program.
Yeah, I just wanted to give you a quick update on those two items. Those are two annual things we do here with the MPO, the work program and the transportation improvement program. As you know, the work program is something that it's a document we identify the major projects to be addressed for the following fiscal year. In this case, it's FY 2019. This coordinated effort between this board, the Transportation Technical Advisory Committee, and the Iowa Department of Transportation. The work program includes all state and federally required planning processes and documentation, ongoing and routine projects, and special projects requested by member entities. And of course, we're here in February, we will be beginning that soliciting projects from the members here. I don't believe that's gone out yet. I know we've got some requests already, but you should be expecting that anytime. The draft work program will be presented to you in March. And it must be submitted to the Iowa DOT, Federal Highway Administration, and the Federal Transit Administration by April 1. The board, of course, will approve the final work program in May. Transportation Improvement Program is our annual programming document for all federally funded transportation improvements within the Iowa City urbanized area and includes all modes of transportation. The TIP formalizes the specific projects and to receive federal funding and the year in which the project's funding is programmed. I think we already talked about there's no new funding this year for STBG and TAP. However, we did approve projects last spring, and two of those were programmed out in FY 22. So they will be included in the 19 to 22 TIP this round. Those two projects include North Liberty's Highway 965 project and University Heights Melrose Avenue project, which are both programmed in 22. So those are the two new items you'll see in the TIP. Of course, the board will review the draft TIP in May, and you'll adopt that in July when it's due to the DOT. Any questions on those two items? We'll be discussing those a lot more in the months to come.
Thanks for the update.
Okay.
Okay, moving on to 4E, discussion of the Krandic passenger rail study.
Yes, you'll remember last September we presented to you the Phase 2 study of the passenger rail Krandic line study. The Phase 2 indicated that the project would look to be between $30 and $40 million between North Liberty and Iowa City. And you remember the first phase looked at Iowa City to Cedar Rapids. The costs there were astronomical on getting it all the way to Cedar Rapids. That first study recommended that we look at and concentrate on Iowa City to North Liberty. That's what Phase 2 did, and that's where we came up with the $30 to $40 million. And I think everybody at that time agreed it was warranted more study. However, since that time, the Iowa Department of Transportation informed us that they were doing some additional studies on the I-380 Crandall corridor, looking at alternative transportation in that corridor, and of course that included passenger rail and some autonomous vehicles. In their study, the DOT basically said that the Iowa City to North Liberty section for passenger rail is warranted for more study. So it kind of supported our Phase 2 study. So while we have Phase 1, Phase 2, and the Iowa DOT studies complete, we're requesting more direction here for Phase 3. Your Phase 3 study, what we're doing now that we have ridership numbers from the DOT, they did a model. Now that we have those, we can do some forecasting of revenue, which is something we were missing. Also, we can look at a benefit cost analysis, a financial plan, how we can secure the operating funds, operation oversight, and proposed station stops, which will be the responsibility of the local government. The Iowa DOT and the Crandall line have indicated that they are willing to cover a portion of the cost of the Phase 3 study. However, there's another wrinkle now. A couple weeks ago, we were invited to a meeting with the City of Iowa City, the Iowa City Area Development Group, and the Convention and Visitors Bureau, Lion Energy, and the Crandall Railroad. The group discussed ways of preserving and utilizing the rail corridor if the local officials determine not to move forward with the rail. While that group did support a Phase 3 study for passenger rail, because I think it was important that we need to finish this, the study on the rail, the group was proposing a rails to trails option. This could become part of the Phase 3 study for passenger rail, or it could be done separately. And of course, it would require additional funding.
So wait, can I interrupt?
Sure.
I would like to know then, the rails to trails then would mean that if the DOT study decided to put rail in, they would have to have new infrastructure? Because the current rail line would become a trail, or
You would
is
do
that
one or
something
the
different?
other.
Yeah, it was one or the other.
Oh, okay.
Now, the DOT has indicated that they would not fund any part of the trail study because they're using federal rail money on the passenger rail side, so they would not be interested in doing that. The rails to trails scope of study could include things like rail banking, which is just another way of preserving the corridor, rail abandonment and conversion processes, which are very detailed and do take some time. Crandall was interested in some of their liability issues in changing the use from rail to a trail. And then, of course, we look at the trail distance and how it ties into existing trails. And, of course, the big one is the infrastructure costs and what it would take to remove the trails to put in a trail, or to remove the rail and put in a trail. So that's kind of where we're at. It's another little wrinkle thrown in there, but we do need some direction. And I know we talked in our last meeting that you folks were going to go back and have some discussions and let us know how you want to proceed. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, just to be clear, so what Brad has said is correct, that, we've gone through Phase 1, Phase 2, and we've always said we'd come back to the board and ask if, there's general interest in Phase 3, which is what we're doing tonight. The trail concept was something that kind of fell in the MPO's lap here as of a few weeks ago when we were invited to this meeting that Brad referenced. For the trail portion, I don't think we're necessarily looking for concurrence from the board for the trail portion. My understanding is, in talks to the city manager of Iowa City, that at least the city of Iowa City is interested enough that we'll probably go ahead and ask the consultant for a cost estimate for that as well. So I think regardless of if we move forward with the phase 3 rail study, which is again what we're asking, I think we'll go ahead and ask them to put together a cost estimate for a review of what a trail would cost too. So rather than implementing the rail, it would be actually implementing a trail on that same rail bed. I think the idea behind this is that there's been some skepticism that the rail is viable, within the next, let's say, 10 to 15 or 20 years. And I think the idea is rather than have that corridor sit idle for that time, you can use it for a trail. And then if and which time comes that we actually want it to be a rail, that rail bed's still preserved. Now, whether or not we would ever remove a trail if it was implemented, remains to be seen. But that's really what we were looking for tonight.
Could you remind me, I remember initially the study went up to the edge of North Liberty. It didn't go into North Liberty, and when you came to our board, we talked about wanting more information to get people in North Liberty and down into Iowa City. And so did it go all the way through North Liberty, or did it just go out to the edge?
I think it stopped at Forever Green is what was proposed, and I think that was strictly a money-saving thing at the time because there's so many crossings as you get into North Liberty. Now, we can get a cost on those crossings and a cost per mile to develop, which we could easily add on and get through North Liberty.
Well,
It's just at the time the consultant thought, we'll just stop there.
I think you could probably just extrapolate what that would be, right, based on what you already know.
Yep.
But would it give you information about potential ridership? If you only went up to there would be a certain number of
I'd
people
have to
who want to be interested.
Inquire with DOT as to what they used in the model, and I have not seen that. But it's a good question.
Our folks would be wanting to know that.
Okay.
Well, yeah, and it came up because the City of North Liberty didn't help fund it because it really didn't go into North Liberty. It just came to the edge.
It stopped in an area where if you wanted to build a parking lot or a station or whatever, all that area is sold off. There's no way you can do it. So we either move it south or try to incorporate us in one way or the other.
Brad, we talked about this at our work session today, at least funding the third phase, and it was a unanimous vote to move on. But I've been aware of this, the new information here about using the Krandic line as a bike trail as well. And one of the things that I thought was good about that, especially if you used rail in the southern portion of the corridor here, from the North Liberty, say it's downtown North Liberty to downtown Iowa City, and it's too cost prohibitive at this point to go north.
Yeah.
Well, we have bike trails through this corridor from Iowa City to North Liberty already, where there's not a direct path or bike trail that's good for commuting to Cedar Rapids will be when we complete the Mahaffey Trail and also the Hoover Trail, because it goes eastwardly or northeasterly to Solon and then to Ely and then back. And so that's not a direct route.
Yeah.
And so the benefit of having a bike trail along the Krandic corridor is it's very direct. And if you're a bicycle commuter, less miles means less time and less effort.
It's a good point. I think the discussions now that I understood was just a trail between Iowa City and North Liberty in that same corridor. They were looking at passenger rail. Further north, I think that's a good question. I think that probably should be added, and we need to involve Lynn County, Cedar Rapids, because I'm sure when this discussion happens, they'll be very interested in that as well.
Well, Lion owns Krandic, and Lion's based in Cedar Rapids, so
yeah,
they could probably be easy to get involved in.
That's a good point. I'll bring that up. And when we work out a scope and look for the
Coralville, we feel it's an asset. We want to investigate it as much as we can.
For the trail or the rail?
The trail, the rail, all of it. We want to do this because I think that if we don't preserve that, we're not talking right now, but if we don't preserve that space, this is a key connection between Coralville, Iowa City, Coralville, North Liberty. We're right in the middle of it. We want to go ahead with it and investigate anything that we can do with that trail. or that rail.
I was going to say, normally I'm a huge supporter of biking infrastructure, but at least from my perspective, I want to keep our eye on the ball for the rail component of it. I think, would this be the first light rail in the state of Iowa, or not?
Yeah, the only rail we have now is Amtrak, the
Okay,
southern rail
okay.
through
So,
us.
It's not light rail.
Well,
No,
it
that's
would be
not
a
light
rail
rail.
system, okay.
It would be
a
first
rail
light rail.
system.
It's a rail system, but there's a lot of
It would
different
be a
options.
light rail, okay.
It would be
But
diesel. It
I
would
guess
be-
my point, if I could finish, is that if it can't be done in this corridor, I don't think it can be done anywhere in the state of Iowa. So at least from my perspective, I think it's extraordinarily important that we move as expeditiously as we can. I'm not convinced that there's not the demand for it. I mean, we see at the same time that we're thinking that that's not going to work, and at the same time looking at expanding 380 to 6 lanes. I think one affects the other. And so I would like that we direct the study, just to communicate that we move as expeditiously as we can. Whether that's a 5-year time frame, 15 seems too long, but that's sort of where I would go with that.
I know there's at least one member of the audience too that would like to speak on this issue, so before we get too far down the path, maybe we should do that.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Kim Casco, and I'm President and CEO of the Iowa City Area Chamber of Commerce. And I'm here this evening on behalf of our 900 chamber members to speak in support of the passenger rail study, Phase 3. We at the Chamber believe, support any effort really to expand transportation options in our communities for 3 main reasons. 1, we believe it increases equity amongst our communities. 2, it provides sustainable alternatives to car travel. And 3, it can often be a great catalyst for economic as well as community development. And so we hope you support the study, and thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, Kim. I have to agree with Rockne that, we're on track for doing a rail study. We're in phase 2 of it, and then all of a sudden it's like, tangent, let's go off and talk about trails instead of finishing what we've got momentum here on this study, and we need more, we want to.
I don't see this changing momentum. I think the phase, my understanding at least, was the phase 3 is still totally dedicated to the rail.
Exactly.
Totally dedicated to the rail. The request is, do we expand that to look at the trail option? If the rail study comes back and says, this isn't going to be feasible for 15 or 20 years, okay, and yet there's liability issues with that space, and we want to try and, as Tom said, we want to try and preserve that for the future for rail if it's not in the immediate future. Can we use it for a number of years as a trail? And my understanding from the discussion is they're going to have to pull all the railroad ties and everything anyways to rebuild it. Am I right, Kent?
Yeah, there's certain sections of it that certainly need to be reconstructed, even for the passenger rail should it occur. Yep.
Right, and so there is that potential that the study would tell us, if rail is 10 or 15 years out, could we in the meantime, without huge additional cost, use it for trail?
Right.
And in the process, make sure that we don't lose control of it for potential rail 10 or 15 years down the road. And if the studies come back and show us that, I think that's a real positive. So I would totally support the 3rd phase of the rail study, and I would totally support the expansion to look at the trail aspect if rail is not viable,
Right, yeah.
and if it looks like there's a time frame that would make sense to even put trail in there.
Yeah, and I think.
Right, because that takes a certain amount of time too, and if it's getting up close to that 10 to 15 years.
Right.
Yeah, and I think what we've got, I think, is what we need tonight. There's at least 3, if not more, of the MPO entities that say, yeah, let's move forward with Phase 3. Both Kranich and the DOT said, yeah, we're fully supportive of moving forward with Phase 3. Really what I think we'll do is, and by the way, we will be in contact with all city administration because there's a finance component of this, of course, too. It's a very small one for the passenger rail because we've only been picking up a third of the total cost for all the local entities. So we're in the past, we've had maybe $3,000 to $4,000 per entity, so it's been pretty cost effective. So I think we've got what we need for that, and we'll contact all city administration. We'll move forward with getting a quote from the consultant. That doesn't mean we have to move forward. They're just going to tell us what it would cost. And then I think separate from that, It may or may not even be from the same consultant, but we'll get a cost estimate for the trail study as well. Then we can move forward with all administration and, excuse me, from your respective communities, and we can make that decision to move forward at that point in time. But really, we just wanted to make sure that there's still interest in the Phase 3 study. You know, because the DOT kind of interjected their study, we were put on pause much longer than we thought we would be. I know some of the communities in the past haven't been as interested, so we just wanted to make sure before we move forward, everybody hadn't, you know, decided that it really wasn't worth pursuing. It's a small commitment financially from our communities, but it's a commitment from taxpayers nonetheless. So I think we've got what we need at least.
On your page here about the scope, is this the full scope of services you're looking at, or is it?
This is just what we'll be asking the consultant minimally to put into the scope of services, but we'll look to them to tell us what we need ultimately. You know, they're the experts. They'll tell us what we need.
That's the most important part for me is we need to end, right? So what,
exactly.
Can we do it or not?
Yep.
What would it cost a writer to write it? What would it cost us to provide that operating expense every year? And then make a decision to pursue it or not.
Yeah, this was always meant to be.
We don't want 4, 5, 6, 7 study and then we're.
Right, no, you're 100% right. This was always sort of intended to be a 3-part study. I mean, that's kind of how we wanted to roll it out.
Yeah, I would.
Because it's one of those studies where if you don't pass sort of muster on Phase 1, there's no point in moving to Phase 2, and rather than just put all the money into a full study that may not give us the results we wanted. So yeah, so to answer your question, Terry, this is just what we feel should be in the plan, but by no means is that all of it. We would look to the consultant to say, yes, we need this plus this, or really we don't need that, you know, that sort of thing.
I think the entities should say, here's the information we want in order to be supported of this. So once we know that, so instead of the consultant telling us what they think we might want to see, we should all weigh in on what we want to see.
Right, and we would provide the quote and the contract, of course, to all city administration. So they'll see that and they'll make sure they know what they're paying for, as we've done in the past. All valid points.
Yeah, these scope items are very general. They need to be hashed out a little bit more. And I think when we do go ask for the funding for the additional studies, we'll ask for your input as to what you want to see.
Yeah.
So to Jim's point, this is it, no more studies, right?
Exactly.
For like at least 10 to 20 years.
Unless you want more.
Because I don't get why it needs to be drug out until time immemorial.
Well, I think this Phase 3 is more the financial side of it. I think the other two were more capital investment. Now we need to know how it runs. We need to know who's responsible for the operating and where that operating's coming from. So it's the financial side of it.
And the issue was if the capital part came back at $1 billion, there was no point to spend the money to go through the additional study. That was the idea behind it.
Which body will make the final decision? Will it be this body, or will it be individual cities with the capital?
No, I think when it comes
actual decision?
actually implementing rail would come from all the different communities, because all the different communities will obviously have a financial component. So the MPO, you know, as far as the MPO board's concerned, we don't have any teeth to tell each one of your individual communities, you know, you must pay X, Y, or Z. So really, I think ultimately, all the communities that are involved will have to agree, and there'll be the funding component then, of course, and the component on how to move forward in terms of who actually manages the rail and that sort of thing. Yeah, because the MPO we can't force, you know, we don't have the teeth to force any communities to pay for something that they may
Could
not
be similar to Jack or something like that.
Right.
Done the 2080 agreements or something.
Yep, correct.
Brad, can we find out how the DOT got their projected ridership numbers?
Sure. Yeah, like I said, I haven't seen that, but I will get that and we can provide that. Any other questions?
Great work. All right, thanks, Brad.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to other business, we've got a report on the Severson Cup Charity Challenge and the award.
And now for the moment you've all been waiting for. I'm Sarah Walls with the MPO with an item that's much less controversial, much happier. Every year, for those of you who are new to the board, we run a friendly, fun challenge between our various MPO entities. It's a way to remember Linda Severson, who was the former HERP Human Services Coordinator, for many years, and a good person that helped all of our communities sort of troubleshoot various issues. So every year, the entities pick a charity of their choice that their staff contributes to, and we award the winner of the Severson Cup based on, or at least for the last 2 years, on who improved the most over their previous year's giving. This year, the entities raised money for all the local food pantries, in addition to the Joan Buxton Children's Aid Fund, which contributes to the entire school district, and the Ronald McDonald House, Valley View Lodge, which is a shelter house fair weather lodge. And overall contributions were up 12% this year overall, total contributions, that is. University Heights is the winner this year. They improved twofold, and so the name of University Heights will be engraved on our lovely Severson Cup. But we also wanted to call special attention to Coralville, who did a particularly good job. Their contribution was up 49%, and they actually accounted for more than 50% of all of the contributions this year. So we did want to give some praise to them. So we will get the University Heights name engraved on the cup, and we will bring that to University Heights, Louise, so congratulations.
Thank you. I just want to say that I knew Linda Severson and worked with her on this board for many years, and that's why the cup means so much to me. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks to everyone. It was really, really nice.
All right, I think that's all we got. Motion, anything else?
No, I just wanted to mention before we move to adjourn is that we do have our 6 o'clock rural board meeting, rural policy board meeting starting here in just a few minutes. So if interested, please stick around.
Motion adjourned.
Or you can stick, or you can.
Is that a second? Yeah. Second. Donahue, all those in favor say aye. We're adjourned.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Terry.